So I'm Paula.
Hello.
I am the global lead for healthcare and life sciences at Kearney, and I'm also the founder of W Health, which is a platform to redesign healthcare with women in mind.
Great. We first spoke 12 months ago in the same event on a slightly different environment, so it's great to be able to catch up again. What's been happening since the last time we spoke?
A lot of things. I feel like I was like such a health newbie last year, and we didn't know what we were coming into. And we had this like massive stage in the middle. There was the heart stage because women's health is at the heart of everything, right? Yeah. So we were there in the middle and just talking to loads and loads and loads of people. And we had arrived with like this little community of like 60 companies, and we just didn't know what we were going into. And we had this hackathon on day one on how do you redesign healthcare with women in mind. If you think about, say, vaccination, or if you think about investment, or if you think about lots of other topics. And then out of that started this sort of like movement, like where we've ended up with just hundreds of people on this platform. 450 companies are now in our W Health community. And since then, we've published a really big paper with the World Economic Forum on how do we redesign clinical trials and research and development for both pharmaceuticals and diagnostics. And we're working on two really exciting things. One, which is how do we change guidelines to make sure that we're putting women at the center of their care and we're not like doing the good old bikini medicine if I'm going to look up here and then I'm going to look down here and I'm just going to look at you holistically and everything that's going on.
Yeah.
And then the second piece is that we need to raise money. So we're in the process of raising a fund.
Yeah, interesting. And so this all ties in with the, there's an episode in the Talking Health Tech feed that out in Sydney, I spoke with the team from Kearney and different, it was off the back of one of the meetups and workshops and pulling together, I guess, part of the community, which all ties into what you're talking about here. But I feel like it's given that Kearney has the global presence, these are kind of problems and challenges that we're feeling everywhere around the world. Is that right?
100%. And I think this year, more than last year, we're going up against a bit of a movement that is like, well, anything that talks about gender equity or gender anything is a little bit complicated. So we need to continue to drive the change, and change looks very different in different parts of the world. So if you're in Australia, you're in a completely different healthcare system than if we are in Europe, but then if we are in the US, and let alone if we're talking about the low and middle income countries. So it really has to be global, but at the same time, it has to be hyper-local so that we're changing the lives of people really on the ground.
How do you feel about, because there's a lot of attention, a lot of interest, and that's all important stuff. But obviously, as you've kind of suggested, and we've talked about before too, I think the more important stuff is that like what people do about it after an event like this, or like beyond the, we all agree that we need better equity in healthcare, and that's just kind of like the right thing to say. So beyond that, the important things. How do you actually get people from getting back to the day job after something like this to doing something real?
So that was one of the challenges that I posed to the team last year, which was we putting a really big problem in front of everybody's eyes, and raising awareness, don't get me wrong, is needed. But that sometimes doesn't take to action. And the reason why is because people will come out of here with a brain full of stuff. And if they think about, for example, women's health, they'll be like, well, but it's so big and it's so complicated because it starts with like really early understanding of biology and very early research, but it's also clinical trials, but it's also investment, but it's also diagnostics, but it's like everything. And because it's everything and you feel so overwhelmed, you may choose to do nothing.
Yeah.
And we need to overcome that. And one of the things that I said to the team is, well, how do we give people the tools to understand in their company, in their organization, what are the little steps that they can take in everyday decisions that are actually going to help us close the gender health gap? And we built it as a tool. It's called the W Health Index. And we've got now 250 companies that have put themselves through the index. So that if I'm a pharma company, I can start to understand, well, how am I making investment decisions? How am I designing my clinical trial? Like, are those the right endpoints? How am I recruiting for clinical trials? How am I supporting women in clinical trials? How am I doing like my medical education and my marketing materials? What am I putting in that little patient information leaflet? Is my pill too big? Can it be swallowed by a female throat? So it's lots of little decisions that you take in say a pharma company or a medtech company that you actually can affect change every single day. So we built that tool, and we really have to see that it's opening the eyes to, yes, it's a really big problem, but it can start to be solved by really little steps that everybody can take.
Love that. As I think too, like you're talking about, that's like such an awesome tool. Keen to check that out. You did make me think, though, like 250 organizations, and it's good to see organizations taking part. The reality, or at least I find, maybe it's just the state of mind that I'm in currently, but there seems to be organizations might choose to take an approach of supporting women's health because it's from a positioning point of view and like it's good for brand and all of those things. Is that bad, or is that kind of part and parcel of the whole journey? Because in the end, it comes down to the individuals and the impact that it has, and we need organization. We're kind of in an environment, depends on where you are in the world, that if any organization, any government, any level of authority says this is what you should do, or this is what we're kind of at a stage where it almost feels like, well, I can't trust that, or what are the actual motives or intentions there? So I don't know, it's a tricky one, but I often grapple with this, is like, on one hand, we want big organizations to take part in this, but we also want it to be genuine and for the right reasons, if you know what I mean.
100%. And I think I will take any advocacy. So if somebody says, yes, I really believe in this, that in itself is just giving like energy behind the cause, and it's giving it visibility. So I'll take it. What I would like to take is, I'll take the kind of the big ambition and the big commitment, but then I'll take the action. And I think that's why we need to continue to bring all of these topics to the attention of corporations, and especially those that have made a commitment, and going back to them and say, well, what have you actually kind of done about it? And unfortunately, I feel that this year in particular, we're at there's been a little bit of a kind of backlash, and kind of with almost like backsliding, because we're even seeing people renege on some of those commitments and being very just very careful and very cautious on the language that they're using. And supporting women's health is not really seen as the right thing to do in this environment, because you are disproportionately focusing on one part of the population, as opposed to this is for everybody. So I would encourage everybody to still think that it is 51% of the population, and there is a lot to be gained from a moral perspective, a social perspective, and also from an economic perspective.
And you got a big presence over here. It looks awesome with the in amongst the community stage. Types of conversations that are happening there. What are you hoping that people take? I think we've kind of touched on some of it in terms of action, but are there any particular conversations and themes that are really standing out in front of mind?
The main thing that we want people to talk about this year is investment, which is a tricky conversation to have when we don't know what the hell is happening with the global economy. But we know for a fact that we can do all of the advocacy in the world. We can design the best possible clinical trials. We can do all of the kind of changes to guidelines and clinical pathways and so on. If the funds don't flow, we're actually not going to see the innovation that is needed, because we fundamentally still do not understand the differences in biology between men and women. So we need to feed that very early research, very early funnel. And then we need to see some of the amazing, amazing startups that are dotted all around that women's health summit stage, that are just at the beginning of the journey. They may be seed, they may be Series A, and they need to get to B and C, and then they need to get to scale. So that growth part of the innovation funnel needs to be funded, and right now it isn't. So for us, the next week is, how can we just make sure the capital flows?